Well, I've already learned something amazing from my time here. I myself always need to be humbled, and I think it's important to know how you can be humbled. And I have two things for you. First, get a spouse. A spouse helps you get humbled real quick. And secondly, do a TED Talk immediately following a video by Hans Rosling where he freaking saws a sword at the end of his talk. So that's one way you can be humbled. So what I want to do is start by having you look at this slide here. I'm going to ask you to imagine all the ways in which you could use these objects for things other than which they were originally intended. Can you look at the hockey sticks for a moment? Can you imagine using those as the frame for a makeshift baby carrier? When you look at the eggs, can you imagine using eggs as a temporary fix for a crack in your car's radiator? Well, starting in 1985, the character MacGyver, played by Richard Dean Anderson, did just this. He solved 433 problems over the course of 7 seasons by taking random objects and combining them together in order to solve problems. In the creativity literature, we call this making associations. Making associations is defined as taking seemingly unrelated ideas and combining them together in order to solve a problem creatively. So let me give you a quick example. I have 2 phobias that I am stricken with and have to deal with every day of my life. The first is roller skating. I'm completely terrified of it. It has its roots in my first boy-girl party, but that's about as much as I'm going to tell you about that one. The second is drinking hot liquids from a Decaux coffee cup. I can't do it. I hate these lids. You might see, wonderful coffee coming through that hole. All I see is the fiery depths of hell coming through that and burning my tongue. That's all I see. All right? So that's my fear. So one time my wife and I were on a road trip, and I was looking at this cup and this lid of evil, and I was looking down at it and thinking, you know what I would love? As I looked at this, what's called a splash stick. I looked at this and I said, I would love if that had the same principles as a mood ring, and if it would change colors based on the temperature of the liquid inside. So that when it reached a particular color, I would know, okay, that's the color that equates to the temperature that I like to drink coffee, and I know I won't burn my tongue. That's making associations. Making a seemingly unrelated connection between a splash stick and a mood ring. That's what it means. Now, unfortunately, we're not very good at this. We're not very good at solving problems in this way. We're frankly not very good at creativity in general. In fact, there was a recent study done, actually it's not that recent, but it has been recently talked about in a lot of different circles, where they did a longitudinal study starting with kindergartners. And they did a test to see how they generated ideas. And it found that in the course of this study, kindergartners scored about 98% at genius level. About 98% of the students studied scored at genius level for this test. But as they got older, fewer and fewer of them scored at genius level. In fact, 200,000 adults were also tested in this same test, and only 2% of the adults scored at genius level. So for many reasons, we get worse at this as we get older. We lose our natural innate ability for creativity. We lose our natural innate ability to utilize skills of creativity such as making associations. But luckily there's hope, because it's something that we can get back. It's just atrophied. It's not something that just because you're not good at it doesn't mean you can never be good at it. In fact, there's a great quote from Alex Osborne. He's the father of brainstorming and one of the key originators of the creative problem-solving model. He said, creativity is more than mere imagination. It is imagination inseparably linked with both intent and effort. And so it's, put another way, creativity can be deliberate. And skills such as making associations can be deliberate. We can learn how to do them more effectively. And there are tools and techniques out there that allow us to capitalize on that. What I'd like to do is give you a few stories that show how we can deliberately make associations. We can proactively choose to apply techniques mentally that help us make these seemingly unrelated connections in order to solve problems. For a little while now, I've been working with a think tank that's focused on education and transformation in education. Specifically, we're looking at the physical learning environment. We're looking at classrooms. And we've developed experimental classrooms where we're able to investigate furniture, lighting, technology, all different factors that you would consider parts of the learning environment. And we're able to investigate all of those in a laboratory setting with students. Early on in the course of the project, one of the math specialists involved in this project came up and said, I'd like to be able to tape down a grid onto the floor of these experimental classrooms. What he wanted to do was bring students in and explore immersive ways in order to understand how they could gain better grasp of Cartesian mathematics and other theories of math. And so essentially what he wanted to do with this grid was play a life-size game of Battleship. He wanted to create an immersive gaming experience by playing Battleship. Well, that got me thinking. What it did was it got me thinking in associative ways. It got me to make associations. I started to imagine what's called a personal analogy. I started using personal analogy. Personal analogy is when the problem solver starts to imagine themselves as part of the problem, taking on characteristics of the problem. A famous thought experiment in which this took place was when Einstein imagined himself riding a beam of light through space, which ultimately helped him develop his theory of relativity. And so what I did was I started to imagine, as this math specialist was talking about this idea, I started to think about, well, what if we shrunk down a bunch of students so that when they were in class, an interactive tablet like an iPad would serve as the floor of their classroom? What could happen if all of those wonderful things that can happen on an interactive tablet could happen with the floor of their classroom? Then I started to look outside of education. I started to look at how are other industries creating experiences with interactive flooring. What's interesting is, you want to know who's doing the most with interactive flooring? It's the dance industry. Dance floors. Dance floors are creating these LED interactive floors for weddings and clubs and different arenas like that. I haven't been invited to those sort of parties yet, but if you guys are having one, I would really like to come. We'll call it research, if that's okay. What I wanted to start to explore was how we could adapt that technology and put it into the classroom. We can imagine when I call a dance floor manufacturer and I say, I'd like to translate your technology into the classroom, I usually get, what kind of school is this? So that's what we're starting to be able to investigate. And so the reason I tell you this story is I want you to understand the power of deliberately making associations, this key mental model for enhancing our creativity, this key skill to creative action. What happens when we combine the interactivity of an iPad or of a tablet, something that's heavily utilized within the confines of the classroom, and combine it with an LED floor? What kind of wonderful immersive experiences could we create for students? So that's just one example. I'm going to give you another one that starts with this image. This image might resonate with some of you. Maybe some of you are wishing that that's exactly what you were doing right now. I can tell you that's kind of what I'm feeling right now. And so what it helps illustrate is that the sedentary lifestyle, particularly of young people, is becoming a huge issue. We're seeing data that shows that students spend somewhere between 9 and 10 hours a day in a sedentary state. They're sitting still. Unfortunately, this is exacerbated by school. Classroom furniture is one of the biggest culprits in this. In fact, like the seat you're sitting in, they're very static. And there's been a number of professionals that have been looking at this. Dr. Dieter Bredeker, a German specialist in posture and movement, said the human body is not developed for sitting still. Our capacity for concentrating and learning increases when we have the opportunity to move. He worked with VS, a furniture company out of Germany that focuses a lot on education, and what they wanted to do was answer a very interesting question. How could we mimic walking and moving around while students are sitting in a chair? How can we design a chair that mimicked walking? What a powerful question. We don't ask questions enough like that. But in order to do that, we have to deliberately make some associations. The first thing they did was they had Dr. Bredeker explain how walking works. What does the torso do during walking or during upright movement? Well, he explained that the torso moves from side to side by about 5 to 6 degrees. And it moves front to back by about 6 to 7 degrees. So that's a good state to be in. In fact, that's a very natural state. We like to do that. It's very comfortable for us. And it turns out it's a good learning posture. So if you're ever in a classroom and you're really struggling to understand what the professor or the teacher is saying, I give you permission to stand up, maybe go to the back of the room and do this while they're lecturing. I'm sure it won't distract them. What you can tell them is, I'm learning. I promise. This is my learning posture, okay? Now that that's out there on the internet, we'll see what happens. But here's what I want to do. I want to show you what they ended up coming with. They looked at the human body and made an association from a natural system of human body and used it to help solve an engineering problem. This isn't a chair that just leans back. In fact, this chair moves just like that torso example. It moves at the same level of degrees, the 5 to 6 and the 6 to 7. And it's moving on all points of axis. It's moving in all the directions. And so I can sit here and I can move around like this just as if I was walking. This is a natural state. I like this. This is comfortable. And what's interesting is when I sat in this chair for the first time, I immediately made another association. I immediately jumped to another connection outside the domain of furniture design. I started to think about companies like this. AMPI. AMPI makes these devices that connect with your cell phones, but they get their power by movement. They're kinetic based. So as you move, you're powering up these batteries and you can connect them to your devices and charge up your devices. Well, I started talking to VS about installing devices like this under these chairs. Can you imagine students all over the world using chairs like this? All the amount of energy that's there that we could capture? So no longer will the hyperactive student that you're trying to get to sit still or trying to get to focus by not moving, no longer will they be seen as a distraction, but the hyperactive kid could be a solution or energy crisis because all they do is create energy by moving. That's what deliberately making associations can look like. Here's the last thing I want to show you, the last story I want to tell you. And this is a type of deliberate association tool that I think is so crucial. Often when we talk about associations, we're talking about taking objects and combining them together in unique ways in order to create inventions. Well, I think the most powerful way to deliberately make associations is to build personal relationships with people that you wouldn't normally engage with. And I think that needs to be a deliberate act. We've got to quit just talking about it. We need to do it. And so what I try to do is about once a year, I try to go to a conference that I have no business going to. It's not a conference that I'm a particular professional in of any sort. And I focus on going around and trying to meet people and understand who they are. Because I believe when you really dig into the passions of people, not for personal or professional gain, but because you care about them, then you create a more fertile soil for creativity to occur. Because you're able to make some unique associations and unique connections. Well, I met a neuroscientist at a recent conference. We started talking and started to get to know him better. And what we ended up creating was an interesting experiment. What we developed was this idea based on NeuroBridge, which is a piece of software that he's developed. NeuroBridge connects to any biofeedback monitor that you put on your body. And it measures all sorts of things, brainwave patterns, pulse rate, skin sensitivity, all sorts of different things. You can connect the software to any biofeedback tool. And what he proposed was that we take biofeedback monitors like smartwatches and give them to students so that when they're in a classroom, if they start to become fatigued, their heart rate will go down and other biofeedback outputs will start to occur. And that information can get pushed through the software and then communicated with other internet-connected devices. It could go straight to the teacher's personal digital device so that that teacher knows, you know what, people are starting to get tired. I need to change my instructional strategy. I need to get them up and move them around and change how they're learning, change their learning environment. But here's the real power of something like this. The real power of a tool like this is that it could communicate directly with the architecture. It could communicate with the physical learning environment. For example, in this scenario, it could recognize that the student is becoming fatigued, and the internet-connected lights could increase in brightness around their particular workstation or their particular desk. All sorts of environmental cues could shift and change based on the individual needs of students. So the architecture could respond to individual learning needs. That's the power of making unique associations, making unique connections. And so that's what happens when we are deliberate about making associations. So here's how I want to close down today. I want you to not only remember that creativity can be sexy, but most importantly, remember that making associations can be a deliberate act. It's something you can learn how to do better. It's something you can improve your capacity for. And it's something for which there are tools and techniques out there that help us enhance our ability to do. Secondly, I want to encourage you to get out beyond your domain, beyond your field of study, beyond your field of expertise, and focus on building relationships with people and making connections with people outside your domain. That's where solutions happen to complex problems, when we look outside where the problem exists, and we look at how it's potentially being solved or how it can be inspired by things outside of us. You never know when dancing at a wedding, swiveling around on a chair, or having a conversation with a neuroscientist could inspire you to think more like MacGyver, make interesting connections, and hopefully bring about a little bit of transformation. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.